Hey guys, tonight, we set sail into cold, misty waters, where the sky broods low, and the sea never quite sleeps. You're perched at the edge of a dragon-headed longship, the carved snout snarling into the wind, as waves slap against the hull like impatient hands. It's nighttime, but the northern summer barely allows full darkness, just a dim, endless twilight. Around you, burly raiders clutch oars with calloused hands, muttering in Old Norse, adjusting sealskin cloaks, and occasionally belching fishy stew. You're not a warrior yet, just one of the crew. Maybe this is your first voyage, maybe not. But as the icy salt spray hits your face and your feet slide on damp wood, you're starting to regret skipping the farming life. Every creak of the ship feels like a prelude to disaster, but you're stuck now. There's no turning back. The sail is up, the wind is strong, and the North Sea is doing her best to make you feed her your lunch. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Back on deck, your knuckles are white from gripping the rail. The wind has teeth. And then just as you're considering pretending to faint and hoping no one notices, one of the older Vikings points toward the horizon. You squint. Through the haze, a blur of gray stone and green turf emerges. It's land, and better yet, a settlement. The mood shifts. The crew perks up. Someone sharpens a blade against the mast. You try not to gulp audibly. Viking raids didn't usually come out of nowhere. They were timed, calculated, and built on long-standing traditions of seafaring and opportunism. This ship is a Snekja, a fast, light vessel ideal for zipping into rivers and hugging coastlines. It doesn't carry a whole army, just enough men to overwhelm an unsuspecting town. You might raid for gold slaves, livestock, or just bragging rights. Historians still argue whether these early raids were pre-planned or opportunistic. Was it strategic, or did someone just shout, "Hey, that monastery looks lootable," and the rest joined in? Either way, you're approaching one of many easy targets lining the coasts of Britain, Ireland, and Francia, rich in treasure, poor in defense. The waves calm slightly as you approach shore. Your stomach doesn't, though. A gull screams above, possibly an omen, or just a gull. You glance at the others, calm, confident, maybe even bored. You, however, feel every jolt of the boat in your ribs. You spot a flock of sheep grazing near a wooden fence. Past that, squat stone buildings with thatched roofs, huddled together, clustered like gossiping hens. And farther in, a small tower, probably part of a monastery. That's where the valuables live. Crosses, goblets, wax tablets, and maybe, just maybe, a few coins tucked away in a chest. It's oddly quiet. No guards, no alarms, just wind and waves. You're not even close to famous battles. Yet this is a prelude, the opening murmur of a storm. Still, your axe feels heavy. The leather strap digs into your shoulder as the longship silently glides toward the shore. The quiet before a raid always felt surreal, like the world was holding its breath. You wonder what the monks are doing right now. Maybe sleeping, maybe chanting, maybe sipping herb tea and talking about angels. Whatever it is, they don't suspect what's about to happen. You reach for your shield. The oars slow. The prow scrapes sand. And just like that, you're no longer just a passenger. You're part of something ancient, something feared. Something that, if historians and angry chronicles are to be believed, unleashes a certain flavor of hell. The prow kisses land, and silence shatters. You leap into ankle-deep water boots splashing cold against your skin. The chill hits harder than you expect. Your breath sharpens. All around you, raiders disembark in practiced rhythm. No barking orders, no war cries yet. This isn't a siege. It's a snatch and run. Speed is everything. Ahead lies a small monastic outpost. Stone walls, wooden gates, and a low chapel topped with a crooked cross. Crows flap off the thatch, offended by the sudden commotion. You clutch your axe. The handle's familiar in your palm, but your fingers still sweat. And then someone finally says it just loud enough to make your stomach flip. Now, the raid begins. Feet pound earth. You follow a blur of motion, your crewmates sprinting toward the chapel like kids late for dinner. Someone throws a torch. Another kicks open a door. A bell rings. Not a warning bell. A chapel bell, yanked frantically by a monk with more faith than foresight. Inside, it smells of incense wax and very recent fear. A cluster of monks in woolen robes stares in disbelief. One drops a scroll. Another clasps his hands and prays faster than a man ever should. You barrel in behind the others, overwhelmed by motion. Cloaks whirl, feet slip, voices yell. You don't strike first. You hesitate. But others don't. You see a goblet snatched from an altar, a carved box stuffed into a sack, a candle still burning in the chaos. A brother tries to bar a door with a broom handle. It doesn't work. A third attempts to recite a psalm through trembling lips. It's strangely beautiful, the words echoing against stone, until someone shouts. Too slow, and grabs the book from his hands. Historians still argue whether the violence of these early raids was exaggerated by later Christian scribes, trying to make martyrs of their brethren. Some say the raiders were ruthless. Others believe they targeted property, not people. But you're here now, and it's complicated. There's panic, but not carnage. At least not yet. Not here. A quirky little detail: some monks tried hiding valuable manuscripts in wells, or even baking them into bread loaves to fool raiders. You don't know that yet, but you do notice someone tugging at a stone in the chapel floor. Secret stash, or just a very nervous monk trying to dig to China. Meanwhile, outside, the livestock are not handling this well. Sheep bleat as if joining a chorus of alarm. Chickens run in all directions like feathered idiots. Someone grabs a goose and laughs when it bites him. The humor is jarring, it doesn't fit. But neither does this moment. You're looting a holy place, and still someone finds time to joke about poultry. You move through the cloister past arched windows and cracked murals. A narrow library holds maybe a dozen books, precious hand-copied, inked with care. Someone sets it ablaze. Not out of hatred, just efficiency. Fire spreads quickly, lapping at parchment and old prayers. It smells like burning leather and lost knowledge. One of your crewmates calls out, waving a silver crucifix. You nod, half impressed. Another finds a small chest and winks as he wedges it open with a dagger. Inside, not gold, just wax seals and a small pouch of dried berries. He looks disappointed. You feel strangely relieved. The sky darkens slightly. Clouds moving in. Time to go. Raids like this don't last long. Minutes, maybe. The trick is speed and confusion. You glance back at the chapel. Its steeple leans like it's ashamed. Smoke curls from the roof. No one is chasing you. The villagers must be watching from trees, praying the Norsemen skip their huts this time. Back at the ship, you're panting. You don't remember running. You don't remember much of it at all. Just flashes of monk's wide eyes, the cold slap of water, the flicker of firelight on stone. You help shove the longship off the sand muscles straining. The wind picks up, as if to speed your escape. Oars splash. The bell still rings in the distance now, just a lonely echo. One of the older raiders grins at you. "First raid?" he asks. You nod. He hands you a strip of dried fish. Could have been worse. Wait till Paris. You chew without tasting. There's smoke on your clothes and a weird knot in your stomach. This wasn't glory. It was chaos, awkwardness, speed. You expected a grand moment. Instead, you feel like you just robbed a library while people were still reading. You glance back one more time. The monastery is still standing mostly, but something changed for them. For you. You're part of a story now, one that monks will write about in anger and fear. And maybe centuries later, someone will read those words to fall asleep. The sea pulls you back like a lullaby, wrapped in mist. As the longship coasts away from shore, the monastery shrinks into the landscape, smoke curling from its roof like a reluctant sigh. You sit among your crewmates, catching your breath, your fingers still tingling. You didn't kill anyone. You think. You mostly grabbed things, ran, and got very yelled at by a goose. Still, the others are nodding at you like you passed some ancient unwritten test. Behind you, the coast returns to silence. Ahead, the open sea yawns wide. Another raid, another prize, another legend stitched into the sails of your story. But this one, the first one, feels like your skin is a bit looser, like your soul is adjusting to its new job title. As you coast around the next headland, someone opens a sack of stolen relics. A jeweled book cover, a silver chalice, and curiously, a pair of wooden clogs. You glance at the man holding them. He shrugs. They looked valuable. They are not. Still, you have to respect the hustle. The crew starts laughing, passing around mead and strange jokes in a dialect even you barely understand. It's strange how quickly the mood lightens. One moment you're a prowling shadow, the next you're listening to a guy reenact a monk tripping over a goat mid-prayer. Viking humor is slapstick heavy, apparently. But here's the truth. No one talks about during recruitment the raid is only half the job. The escape is the real art. You move fast, leave little trace, and vanish before anyone figures out what direction to chase. It's not cowardice. It's logistics. Historians still argue whether these early raids were driven by sheer brutality or strategic opportunism. Some believe it was about spreading terror. Others argue it was just a job, dangerous but profitable, like long-distance plumbing with swords. As the sail rises again, you settle into rhythm. The ocean slaps gently against the hull. The wind snaps at this canvas. Somewhere above, a gull decides to relieve itself near the bow. You take that as a personal insult. Night creeps in properly now. No more endless twilight, just a moon smudged behind clouds. A raider beside you begins humming a tune. It's off-key, slightly creepy, and somehow soothing. Another begins sharpening his axe with a rhythm you'll hear in your dreams. And then someone breaks into a tale. Storytelling is as essential to Viking life as raiding or rowing. Around the fire or on long, damp voyages like this, stories are currency. Glory handed down in words. The one you hear now is about a man who once stole a golden harp from a bishop's pillow and was cursed to hiccup until he returned it. Did it happen? Probably not. But you hope it did. The boat rocks steadily. You drift a little head, nodding forward. Your muscles hum from exertion. Somewhere in your satchel, a small wooden cross rattles against a bag of dried fish. You didn't mean to take it. It just ended up there. Another crewmate leans in to show off his loot. A vellum scroll covered in strange Latin scribbles. Might be magic, he whispers. Wide-eyed. It's probably someone's grocery list, but you nod respectfully. You don't need any sudden curses on your conscience. Sleep creeps in slowly, curling around your boots, your belt, your bones. The sea rocks you gently now, like a cradle, carved from fear and adrenaline. You think of home, of snow crunching underfoot, of the creaky door to your mother's house, of how much warmer her stew is than whatever's sloshing in your gut right now. But something inside you has shifted. You're not just someone's son anymore. You're a raider, a participant in what scholars, centuries from now, will call the Viking Age. Though you frankly are still wondering if it's too late to become a fisherman. Tomorrow there will be more rowing, more scouting, maybe another raid, maybe not. These things aren't always planned. They unfold like sails in wind, sloppy, dramatic, a bit torn at the edges. And you're still alive. Which frankly is a miracle considering you nearly fell off the ship climbing back aboard. You close your eyes. Somewhere behind you, the chapel bell is still ringing faintly across the water. You wake to the creak of timber and the familiar tang of seawater in your nostrils. Your back is stiff. Your neck stings. And there's a pebble in your boot that's either been there all night or is a very ambitious barnacle. Around you, the longship glides smoothly beneath a pale sky as dawn stretches its arms. No one speaks yet. Morning is sacred, not in a holy sense, but in a don't talk to me until I've splashed my face and found my lucky axe kind of way. The air is colder now. Somewhere along the coast of Northumbria, or maybe farther south, you've stopped trying to keep track. That's the helmsman's job, and his navigational method seems to involve staring at the sun and mumbling about seabirds. Still, it works. Mostly. You chew a piece of stale flatbread thinking about yesterday's chaos. The others don't reflect much. They're already planning the next hit. One town burns and another waits a few coves away. Such is the rhythm of this life. Move fast. Strike hard. Vanish before breakfast. Ahead, a coastline shimmers into view. This one, dotted with cottages and little fishing boats drawn up on shore. It looks sleepy, humble, and poorly defended. The perfect target. You glance at the crew, more alert now. The mood shifts like wind against canvas. Blades are checked, helmets adjusted, shields within reach. But unlike the monastery, this town has people who can fight back. Not many, but enough to make things interesting. You remember an old saying muttered by one of the ship's veterans, "Loot is good. Glory is better. But getting out alive is best." You've taken that to heart, especially now as the wind dies and the oars come out. This won't be a swift smash and grab. You'll need speed and chaos, two Viking specialties. Historians still debate whether these coastal towns were aware of their vulnerability, or simply hoped rather desperately that the sea would forget them. Some built wooden palisades. Others just prayed. Today you'll see how this village chose to gamble. Your feet touch shore again. This time, no dramatic bell. Just the startled bark of a dog and the shriek of a woman who immediately ducks back inside her cottage. A man appears, holding a rake, an actual farming rake, as if he might ward off a half-dozen armored raiders with it. You appreciate the optimism. The town stirs to life, but it's a clumsy, unarmed sort of resistance. You rush past a thatched roof, spilling with drying cod, and nearly trip over a barrel of eels. The smell is unforgettable, not in a good way. One of your crew shouts, waving you toward the central storehouse. Inside are sacks of grain jugs of something alcoholic, and for reasons unknown, a stuffed falcon wearing tiny spectacles. You don't ask. You just take the falcon. It feels right. Another finds a locked chest, While he tries to bash it open with the pommel of his sword, a woman throws a wooden spoon at his head. It bounces off harmlessly, but her glare could melt iron. You nod in her direction, half impressed, half terrified. Then, just as things seem under control, a group of townsfolk emerges from the far end of the village, armed with farming tools, kitchen knives, and righteous fury. They form a shaky line. Not trained soldiers, but not running either. This moment sticks with you. You could charge. You could shout. But instead, your group pauses. There's a beat, a breath shared across space, and then your leader raises his hand. You don't engage. You pull back. You take what's portable and leave what's not. The ship is calling. Historians still argue whether Viking raiders had codes of conduct. Were they mindless pillagers or disciplined opportunists? The answer frustratingly seems to be, it depends on the day. You retreat without bloodshed. That's not always the case, but today it feels better. You still have loot, still have stories, still have that falcon. And as you shove off the beach once more, you realize something. Not every raid is about terror. Sometimes it's about power, the ability to strike, and choose not to. Back on the ship, the mood lifts again. Someone makes a joke about the spoon-wielding woman, and how she nearly took someone's ear off. Another starts composing a song about the falcon. The sea catches the wind, and your journey continues. Another town fades behind you, and in its place, the vast unknown. More villages, more loot, more stories yet to be carved into memory, like runes on an oar. You're halfway through a smoked fish and barley mash, when one of the older raiders leans toward you and mutters, "There's a code, you know. Not written, but real." You glance up from your bowl, unsure if he's talking about raiding etiquette, or the way he just saw you eat fish with your hands. Turns out it's the former. He continues between bites. No killing kids, no fighting over loot until we're back on the ship. And always share the mead. You nod slowly, pretending this is common knowledge, even though the closest thing you've seen to a rulebook was a guy using a bone as a spoon. Still, it gets you thinking. The so-called Viking code is murky. It wasn't some ironclad constitution, but more like a series of social agreements hammered out by experience and mutual interest. You raid together, you sail together, and you hopefully survive together. Too much backstabbing, and suddenly no one wants to share their turnips with you. Historians still argue whether such codes were consistently followed or retroactively romanticized. Were the Vikings principled warriors or just disciplined? When it was convenient? The truth seems to live somewhere between. Your crewmates may joke about stealing saints' bones, but they're quick to divide loot fairly. Care for wounded comrades, and never steal another man's socks. As the day unfolds, you sail along the coast, skipping larger towns, too risky, too many eyes. Instead, you anchor near a small inlet, hidden by pine trees and sharp rocks. It's a temporary camp, not a settlement. Just a place to dry cloaks gut fish and swap stories over campfire smoke. A few raiders wander inland to scout. You're left behind with the less glamorous duties sharpening blades, boiling whatever animal parts survived the raid, and trying not to choke on the smoke from damp firewood. The falcon, now tied gently to a post, eyes you like it's judging your life choices. Fair. As night falls, the fire crackles, and the mood softens. Someone hums a droning tune on a wooden flute. Another tells a story of a raid that went wrong when the villagers turned out to be retired warriors. "We thought it'd be like stealing cheese from a blind monk," he says. But it was more like running into 10 angry bears with pitchforks. There's laughter mead and gentle teasing. But beneath it all, something steady. A bond formed not just through violence, but through proximity, absurdity, and mutual discomfort. You may not like everyone on this crew, but you trust them at least enough not to smother you in your sleep and steal your boots. Another unspoken rule: don't talk about home too much. Everyone misses it. Mothers' lovers, even sheep, have been known to make grown raiders misty-eyed. But it's easier to joke than to admit that raiding is partly running from debts, boredom, or expectations that didn't fit. For every warrior seeking gold, there's another just trying to not freeze in a Norwegian winter. And not all raids are glory-drenched epics. Sometimes you spend more time chasing pigs through someone's garden than you do swinging a sword. You've already learned that. Still, the code holds. You help cook. You pass the flask when it comes your way. You nod along with old stories. And when it's your turn to take watch, you stay awake, even if only because that falcon definitely moved when you weren't looking. The wind picks up again. The pine trees shiver. You wrap yourself tighter in your cloak and stare at the coals. Tomorrow might bring another raid, another risk. But tonight you sit among men who share warmth, drink, and the quiet dignity of not snoring too loudly. And really, what more could you ask for? The sun rises reluctantly, dragging its light across the waves, like someone peeling off a too warm blanket. You stretch bones popping like kindling and stamp out the last embers of the fire. A gull screams overhead. Maybe it's the same one from the monastery. Maybe it's just that all gulls sound equally furious. Breakfast is leftover fish and flatbread again. The falcon still tied to the post, still judging. You begin to suspect it's royalty in disguise. The others pack up the camp with mechanical efficiency. Cloaks are wrung out blades, sheathed boots pulled on. Another day, another target. As you climb into the boat, a younger raider asks the question that's been boiling in your mind since you signed up. Why do we even raid? He doesn't mean today or this town. He means why this life at all. One of the older men answers without turning around. Because goats don't pay taxes. It gets a laugh, but the truth hangs heavier than his tone suggests. You've heard several explanations already. Land back home is scarce. The soil is stingy, and kings want more from their peasants than the peasants have to give. There's glory, sure, and tales to be told, but also a brutal kind of math. Farming takes months. Raiding takes days. If you survive, you feast. If not, well, someone gets your boots. Historians still argue which factor mattered most: climate over population. Greedy kings pushing younger sons out to make their own way. Some even point to inheritance customs. How land only went to the eldest, leaving everyone else with a sword, a boat, and a lot of sibling resentment. And then there's the more romantic explanation: curiosity. The Norse weren't just raiders. They were travelers, merchants, storytellers. People who stared at the sea and wondered what was beyond the next headland. Of course, your own reasons are a little fuzzier. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was that one girl who laughed when you tried poetry. Maybe it was the tax collector's goat eating your barley. Who's to say? The boat moves smoothly now, hugging the coastline like a familiar blanket. In the distance, you spot a cluster of stone houses larger than the last village, but still isolated. Your leader points, and no one argues. Another day, another raid. But not every raid ends in flames. This one's different. You come ashore to find the town abandoned. Not in panic, just empty. Doors hang open. Cooking pots still warm. It's like everyone simply walked away mid-task. You search a hut. There's a child's doll made of straw, still clutched in a blanket. A fish roasting on a spit, slightly charred now. a tunic hung over a chair to dry. It's eerie. Historians call this premature flight, villagers who got smart and ran before the ships landed. You'll learn that some towns built watch systems. They'd light signal fires on nearby cliffs, alerting neighboring settlements. Or they'd post scouts with sharp eyes and faster feet than yours. You wander into what looks like a communal hall. Empty, too. But on the table is a jug of something that smells far too nice to waste. You take a sip. It's sweet, with a tang of berry and smoke. You're not sure what it is, but you definitely want more of it. Outside, your crew shrugs. No treasure, no prisoners, not even a decent chicken. Just echoes and uneaten food. The wind whistles through open windows like it's laughing at you. So instead of plundering, you clean up. You collect the roasted fish, the jug of strange drink, and a few oddly well-made wool cloaks. Someone takes a pillow from morale. Another tries to claim a carved bench until you remind him you can't sail it home. And then, before you leave, someone leaves a coin behind on the table. Just one, a silver piece. Why, no one says. Maybe it's respect. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's guilt. The Norse weren't heartless, just practical. And sometimes a gesture feels better than silence. You board the ship again, a little quieter than usual. The sea welcomes you back, unbothered by what did or didn't happen. The wind fills the sail. The village shrinks behind you. Somewhere inland, the villagers are probably watching, breathing sighs of relief. Maybe even laughing at the image of hardened raiders nibbling their leftovers. And you've tasted a different kind of raid, the kind where the only thing taken is time, and possibly their wine. The long ship glides south now, hugging the uneven curve of the coastline like a whisper. The air's getting warmer, which means you're drifting farther from home and closer to territories that might have actual defenses. Watchtowers, sentries, perhaps even a local warlord with more ambition than skill. You stretch your arms and crack your neck. You're not sure what hurts more, your back or the weirdly judgmental memory of that falcon. The scout perched near the bow gestures ahead. A bluff. A scattering of houses. And most interesting of all, a crude wooden tower rising from a rocky outcrop. Someone's finally trying to stop you. It's not impressive. Just a skeleton of logs lashed together with twine, maybe a bell at the top, and a sentry with a horn, or more likely a slingshot and poor aim. Still, it means you're not invisible anymore. Word of the raids is spreading. Historians still argue how long it took coastal communities to organize real defenses. Some sources say decades. Others insist that after the first raid, local rulers scrambled to fortify monasteries and train militias. Truth is, most towns didn't have the money, manpower, or time. They built what they could and hoped the gods, or at least the weather, would do the rest. Your crew rose quietly now, eyes scanning the bluff. No smoke, no movement. The water slaps gently against the hull like a sleepy lullaby. But you know better. This could be an ambush, or a trap, or just a town with very good hearing and very fast feet. You dock at a shallow cove, boots sinking into sand. This time, it's reconnaissance first. No torches, no shouting. You move like wolves, low, silent, aware. The wooden tower groans in the wind, unattended. Or is someone watching you right now behind a slit in the wall, holding their breath? You split into groups. Yours moves inland past nettle bushes and a path lined with oyster shells. It's a small detail, but it sticks with you. Someone took the time to mark a path with shells. Maybe for travelers. Maybe for trade. Maybe for aesthetics. Even raiders can appreciate design. The town is modest, half hidden in a grove of ash trees. Wooden fences, circular huts with turf roofs, and a small shrine with a carved stone deity that looks like a surprised fish. You stare at it for a moment. Is it supposed to be intimidating? If so, it's failing. But then movement. A blur behind a hut. A figure vanishes into shadow. Someone's still here. You don't call out. That's not the Viking way. Instead, your group fans out cautious. No one wants to spook a farmer into doing something heroic with a rake. One of your crew returns with news the townsfolk have holed up in the hills. The scout saw smoke high up where no sheep should be. So what now? You take what little is left, some salted meat, a well-carved comb, and a handful of bronze trinkets likely more sentimental than valuable. Another empty conquest. Still, it's not about the loot anymore. It's the pattern town after town, learning, reacting, adapting. A kind of conversation, really. You raid. They run. You chase. They hide. Everyone gets a bit better at their job. Back at the tower, one of your crewmates climbs up to the bell platform. There's a single horn hanging from a peg, and a pair of sandals neatly placed by a bedroll. Looks like the sentry was here. He just decided to clock out early. Your friend blows the horn for fun. The sound echoes across the trees, long and low like a warning, or a yawn. Then he tosses it into the bushes. You leave behind more smoke this time. Not fire, just a signal. A reminder. You were here. You could have done worse. You didn't. Not because you're noble, just because you're not in the mood for a chase today. Historians debate whether these raids were meant to destabilize kingdoms, or simply test the waters, both literally and politically. But you're not thinking about geopolitics. You're thinking about how your boots are still wet from the cove, and how you'd kill for dry socks and a day off. You sail again, and this time you pass other ships, not raiders, merchants. Some nod, some steer clear, others wave oddly friendly as if to say, "We don't have anything you want. Please don't take our raisins." You wave back. Raisins aren't worth dying for. Worth. You pull into a narrow fjord just before dusk, the longship slipping between rocky cliffs, like a thief ducking into an alley. The sun dips low, painting the sky with streaks of amber and purple. You're not here to raid. You're here to rest. Tonight, you dock near one of your own. A Norse settlement, modest wood-smoked, and full of familiar smells. You can already make out the outline of longhouses through the trees, their timber walls weathered, but proud. This is no target. It's a way station, a place where the mead flows like a loose tongue, and stories are currency. The village greets you like a cousin who owed you money and just remembered. Kids run up to stare at your armor. Dogs sniff your legs like you might be carrying cheese. And inside the largest longhouse, the fire crackles loud and inviting. It smells like roast goat pine smoke and sweat-soaked wool, better than it sounds, honestly. You duck through the doorway and into warmth. The smoke clings to the rafters. Shields hang from the walls. Someone hands you a horn of something sweet and fermented. You don't ask what it's probably better that way. Now you're in the heart of Norse domestic life. Longhouses are functional lived in, and louder than you'd expect. Livestock often sleep indoors. So do grandparents. Privacy. Not really a concept here. You squeeze between benches, nod to strangers who nod back harder, and finally collapse onto a hide-draped plank. The meal is simple: roast meat, barley porridge, and dried apples. Someone passes you a bowl of sour goat milk. You accept it like it's fine wine. It's not. But again, manners. Conversations buzz around you. Who raided where? Who stole what? Who nearly fell into a latrine while running from an angry goose? You listen, drink, and start to thaw. Here you're not an invader. You're just a man with a sore back and a tale to tell. Historians often overlook this quieter side of Viking life. The Longhouse wasn't just a home. It was a hub. A courtroom, a feast hall, a gossip den. Decisions were made here. Alliances formed, marriages arranged, grudges aired. Sometimes resolved. Sometimes simmered for another decade. The man next to you, a hulking brute with more beard than face, offers you a slice of smoked horse meat. You politely decline. He shrugs and eats both slices. Respect. In the corner, an old woman is carving a rune stick. She's humming something low and rhythmic, and you recognize a few of the words, something about a sea god and a lost comb. It's probably a metaphor, but it might just be a song about personal hygiene. Runes aren't just for magic, by the way. They're for records, notes, shopping lists. One story tells of a Viking who carved a love poem onto a fish and threw it through a woman's window. Historians still debate whether she married him or threw the fish back. Someone starts a tale about a raid on a town where everything was made of clay. Houses, pots, even shoes. The punchline involves a collapsing latrine and a very surprised bishop. You're halfway through laughing when someone grabs a lyre and begins plucking a tune. The mood shifts, softens. The Longhouse leans into story time. You don't talk much. You're tired. But you listen. And eventually, you slip into that warm space between wakefulness and dream. The place where your muscles loosen, and the flicker of firelight on the beams begins to dance like shadows on waves. The mead is strong. The food is warm. The floor is softer than a monastery's stone slab. For now, the world is smaller than the sea, and bigger than your fears. You are here. You are safe. You are slightly drunk. And tomorrow the tide calls again. Morning in a Longhouse arrives not with sunlight, but with noise, snoring, coughing, and the unmistakable sound of someone dropping a wooden bowl onto a hard floor. You blink awake, mouth dry, muscles stiff, and your head full of bees. Not actual bees, of course, just the buzzing kind that mead leaves behind when it overstays its welcome. You sit up slowly, hoping to appear stoic and dignified. Instead, your back cracks so loudly that the dog sleeping nearby lifts its head in judgment. Fair enough. Outside, the village is stirring. Smoke rises from hearths. A woman walks by carrying a basket of eels. Children play some elaborate game involving antlers, mud, and shrieking. You don't ask. You just stretch and head for the fire pit, where someone's reheating what can only be described as barley porridge's angrier cousin. After breakfast, one of the locals invites you to the rune-stone circle near the edge of the village. For blessings, he says. Which sounds harmless enough. You follow boots crunching over frost-tipped grass until you arrive at a ring of upright stones, covered in etched lines and serpentine carvings. Some are messages to the gods. Some are bow warnings. One looks suspiciously like a recipe for fish stew. You take a moment to etch your own rune, a crude symbol that probably means still alive somehow. The man beside you nods like it's profound. Runes weren't just for rituals. They were the Norse version of text messaging. Quick notes, names, boasts, even jokes. One rune stone discovered in Sweden reads essentially, "I carved this because I was bored." Historians still chuckle over that one. But runes were believed to hold power too. Spells, blessings, curses. Carved into weapons, worn on pendants, scratched into boats. The logic being, if you're going to hurl yourself into battle, a little magical insurance doesn't hurt. You remember a crewmate who swore his axe was blessed by a seeress. He'd whisper to it before raids like a lover or a very intimidating pet. Whether it helped or not is unclear. The axe did eventually return. The crewmate didn't. Historians still debate the line between magic and theater in Viking society. Were runes genuinely believed to have mystical powers, or were they mostly symbolic part of a warrior's performance? Probably both. Belief and showmanship often go hand in hand, especially when you're charging into danger for the 100th time. Later that day, you find yourself alone by the riverbank, washing grime from your arms. The water is icy, but it clears your head. You look at your reflection and barely recognize it. Your hair's longer. Your eyes are harder. You've got a new scar near your jaw. A souvenir from bumping into a shield, not a battle. Still, it counts. And just when you're starting to feel introspective, someone throws a frog at you. You spin around. One of the local kids grins and runs off. No reason, no explanation. Just frog. You shake your head, laugh, and head back to the boat. Time to move on. You've rested enough, and while the longhouse was cozy, you're starting to miss the sea in the same way a dog misses chasing its tail uselessly, but with conviction. Before leaving the village, Elder gives your group a small charm bones, tied with red twine, carved into the shape of a ship. For luck, she says, though her tone suggests you'll need more than that. The long ship waits, bobbing gently in the shallows. Your crew loads supplies, dried meat, rope a suspiciously large cheese wheel, and prepares for departure. You climb aboard, rubbing the frog water from your neck. The wind catches the sail. The village fades. And the sea, cold, unpredictable, strangely comforting, welcomes you back. Hours slip by under the gray sweep of clouds. You sit with your back against the side of the longship legs, stretched out eyes watching the endless blue shuffle beneath the keel. The wind whistles through the sail like a lullaby for warriors, just soft enough to relax you, just sharp enough to remind you that peace never lasts. Then someone nudges you. You sit up, blinking away daydreams of hot stew and dry socks. We're near Lindisfarne, he says. You feel that name like a bell, tolling deep in your chest. Lindisfarne, 793 AD. The site that lit the match. It's the raid scribes couldn't stop writing about. The one that made kings panic monks pray harder, and Viking reputations echo across Europe. The island comes into view, rising from the mist like a ghost. Stone buildings, tall crosses, and waves slapping the shore as if trying to scrub away the past. You didn't raid it, but you know someone who did. Everyone does. It's become a tale, a badge, a whispered line in dark corners of longhouses. You think this was brutal? You should have seen Lindisfarne. Historians still debate the raid's true scale. Some say it was a massacre. Others claim the monks were spared, just robbed blind. It's hard to know. Most of what we have comes from Christian sources, and those weren't exactly handing out 5-star reviews. Heathens and godless wolves were popular phrases. You come ashore quietly. The place feels heavier, as if memory has weight, and here it presses against your shoulders. You walk past a chapel. Empty. Cold. The walls still bear the gouges of that long-ago assault. A wooden door hangs crooked. A relic that's seen too many winters. Your leader insists on reverence, no looting, no torches, no swagger. We're not here for that, he says. We're here to remember. So you walk, past ancient stones, past quiet graves, past the spot where they say the bell rang 3 times before the first axe fell. You can almost hear it now. Or maybe that's just the wind through the ruins. and then you find it a weathered cross, half swallowed by ivy. At its base lies a small pile of tokens, coins, feathers, bits of iron. Offerings, maybe, from locals, or maybe from raiders who, like you, came back not to plunder, but to listen. One of your crewmates tells a story. Half-whispered a raider who returned to Lindisfarne years later, joined the monks, and spent the rest of his life copying manuscripts. Atonement or boredom. No one's sure. You sit by the shore, fingers trailing through the damp sand. A seal bobs in the waves, watching you with those dark, unreadable eyes. You wonder what it saw that day all those years ago. Chaos, fire prayers, screams. Or maybe just men doing what men do, arriving, taking, vanishing. The sea laps quietly. A gull shrieks once, then falls silent. You don't stay long. You leave nothing. You take nothing. But something in you shifts. Back on the ship, no one speaks for a while. Even the ones who never cared before seem quieter. Thoughtful. The sail rises. The tide pulls you back. And Lindisfarne drifts into fog, once again, the past folding over it like a closing book. Some stories are too big to tell. Others are too quiet not to. The fog clings to your beard and soaks your sleeves, the sea now more gray than blue. You pass a headland where cliffs lurch out of the water like drunken giants. And nestled between those cliffs lies a cluster of weathered homes. Anglo-Saxon, by the look of them. Not much more than wooden huts with straw hats, but you can already smell smoke curling from the chimneys. Life is stirring there, unaware or unconcerned that you've just drifted out of a shadow, like some Simi-born rumor. You don't expect riches here. No cathedrals, no gilded crosses. But what it does have is food tools, livestock, and maybe a few coins tucked under someone's bed. Enough to make it worth a visit. The longship kisses the shore with barely a splash. You hop out, boots sinking into soft mud. There's a kind of hush in these villages, like even the chickens are wary of making noise. You move quickly, weaving between houses like a ghost in broad daylight. Someone spots you. A woman clutching a bundle of herbs freezes, then darts into her home. A dog barks once, then disappears into the brush, clearly rethinking its life decisions. You pass a field where a man stops mid-scythe and just walks away. The village doesn't resist. It doesn't flee either. It just sort of deflates, like a sack losing its shape. The men vanish. The women disappear. The air fills with the smell of root vegetables and something faintly burnt. You knock on one door. No answer. You peek in another window. Empty. You enter the nearest house. It's tidy. Poor, but cared for. A woven blanket on the bed. A small carved cross on the wall. A bowl of berries left half-eaten on a stool. Someone was here moments ago. And then you hear it. The cluck. You turn to find a chicken bold and unbothered, staring at you from the corner like it owns the place. You stare back. It blinks. You blink. There's a moment of mutual respect. Then it flaps past you and escapes out the door. You sigh. The others have found little more, some pottery, some iron nails, a barrel of very suspicious-looking apples. One man finds a small coin under a mat and hoots like he just unearthed a crown. Another finds a harp and immediately tries to play it badly. The locals aren't far. You spot them on a nearby hilltop, just silhouettes watching. Not with anger, not even with fear. Just resignation. They know the drill. You're not the first. You probably won't be the last. Historians still argue whether these rural Anglo-Saxon settlements were more inclined to resist or to retreat. Some chronicles paint them as helpless. Others suggest a quiet form of resistance, hiding their best goods, warning each other with smoke signals, playing the long game, watching you take the bait, while the real treasures lie buried in fields or hidden in forest hollows. You gather what you can: 2 sacks of grain, a few tools, a particularly smug-looking goat, and return to the ship. No blood spilled, no shouts, just a village that's learned how to absorb a raid and keep moving. As you row back, one of your crew mutters, "Not even a fight." But he doesn't sound disappointed. He sounds tired. These raids, the ones where no swords are drawn, leave a stranger kind of mark. Less visible, more haunting. You glance back as the village shrinks behind you. Smoke curls from chimneys again. Life resumes. Somewhere, someone will joke about the goat. Someone else will start reforging what was taken. And the children, already halfway to forgetting, will run through the streets pretending to be you. Wooden sticks as swords, straw helmets cocked sideways. You're both villain and legend now. The sea takes you again. You're drifting into familiar waters now, not in the sense that you've been here before, but because the tales have. Paris, the great city on the Seine, fat with silver, bursting with churches, and according to one crewmate, absolutely covered in soft bread. You'll believe that when you eat it. At first, the idea was simple raid, a riverside village, then vanish. But someone got bold. Someone said, "What if we just kept going?" And like that, the long ships sailed up the Seine like a row of sharp teeth, looking for something to bite. What followed was less a raid, and more a traffic jam with weapons. The rivers narrowed. The banks grew crowded. And suddenly, you weren't just hitting a few huts, you were looking at the fortified walls of one of the biggest cities in the Frankish realm. A place with walls, soldiers, and probably more crossbows than goats, which is saying something. Still, your crew isn't the first to try this. The infamous siege of Paris in 845, led by the legendary Ragnar. Yes, that Ragnar set the tone. He didn't just knock. He kicked the gates off the hinges, took the city, demanded a ransom, and left with enough silver to buy a fleet of floating taverns. Historians still argue whether Ragnar was real or an echo, an amalgam of multiple warlords wrapped in a name. But whoever led that raid, the Parisians definitely remember it. You don't get to siege Paris today. That's not how this version of history goes. You get stuck just outside it. River guards trade barriers, and a very flustered-looking fisherman who rows past, shouting something about Vikings again. Really still. You press in. You anchor outside a village on the outskirts, where the city's shadow looms like a scolding parent. This place doesn't have walls, just hope, and a lot of ducks. You raid. Quick and clean, a bakery, a small shrine, a merchant's house with too many pillows and not enough locks. No resistance. Though one elderly man throws a shoe at you, it hits a crewmate square in the chest. He keeps it as a trophy. Then horns from the city, long, low, and unmistakably full of "go away." That's your cue. You retreat not in fear, but in professionalism. You've pushed as far as you can. And anyway, this wasn't about conquest. It was a test, a probe, a gentle reminder that long ships can go wherever the water flows, and no city, not even Paris, is untouchable. Historians note that these inland raids weren't just brute force. They were statements. The Norse didn't need to hold cities. They only needed to prove they could reach them. And when kings panicked, they paid. Silver land trade rights. Dangeld, they called it. Literally, Dane money. A nice way of saying, please don't burn everything. You pass a barge on the way out. Frankish traders looking very interested in your direction. One raises a hand. You wave back. Maybe they're hoping to sell you cheese. Maybe they're just counting swords. Back on open water, your crew bursts into laughter. One man hums a tune he claims was composed by a Parisian bard right before surrendering his wine cellar. Another makes duck impressions that are honestly too good. Paris isn't yours, but it knows you were here. That's enough for now. You sail on full of smug silence and stolen honeycakes. The long ship rides easy now. The river behind you. The open coast ahead. The crew lounges like cats in the sun. Boots off blades, sheathed and morale suspiciously high. Someone even starts braiding their beard, a surefire sign that things are too quiet. Then your leader announces quite casually, "We're not raiding the next one. We're negotiating." Negotiating. You glance around to see if anyone else looks as confused as you do. A few crewmates mutter. One rolls his eyes and another shrugs. "It happens," he says, picking something mysterious out of his teeth. "Sometimes kings pay us to not raid them. Turns out kings don't like surprises. And when you've burned a few too many villages, they start to see the value in preventative payments. It's called Dangeld. And yes, it's as strange as it sounds. You show up, look threatening, rattle a few swords, and someone hands you a chest of silver with the firm understanding that you go away. It's like being paid to leave a party before you drink all the ale. Historians still debate whether Danegeld encouraged more raids or helped stop them. One side says it was like feeding stray cats cute at first, but eventually you've got 40 cats and no furniture. The other side argues it bought breathing room, time, safety, a temporary shield made of coins. You approach the next town under a white flag. Well, a whitish rag tied to an oar. It's symbolic more than anything. No helmets, no war cries. Just a ship full of very relaxed-looking raiders, and one guy still chewing honeycake from the Paris raid. You're met at the shore by what you assume is a noble fine cloak. Shiny boots the general air of someone who hasn't sharpened an axe in his life. He waves politely. You wave back. Negotiations begin. They're simple. You make it clear you could raid the town. You list the benefits, well, your benefits. Speed surprise, proven track record. The noble nods solemnly. Then he produces a chest. Silver. Not a king's ransom, but enough to keep your crew smiling and your leader interested. You don't touch the town. You don't even step ashore. It's an odd sensation being paid to float in place. But silver is silver, and your arms appreciate the rest. You spend the night on the ship, anchored just beyond arrow range. The townspeople light signal fires anyway, probably out of habit. You toast their caution with mead. One crewmate mutters, "Easiest raid I've never done." Another starts composing a saga about it. The day we did nothing and still got rich. That one probably won't be sung in many halls. Still, this moment reveals something. Power doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it's about fear, reputation, the threat of violence, not the act. You've become an idea. And that idea now fills chests with silver and royal scribes with nervous ink stains. As you drift away in the morning, a few townspeople stand by the dock watching. Not with hate, not with relief, just curiosity. Maybe they wonder what it's like to live on a boat. Maybe they wonder why men with swords didn't use them. Maybe they wonder if they overpaid. You leave them wondering. The sail rises, the coast shrinks, and your pockets jingle. You didn't lift a sword today, and yet you feel heavier somehow, like you just proved something. Not to them, to yourself, that you can raid with steel or with silence. The wind shifts cool and fragrant with pine and salt, and someone in the crew finally asks the question that's been bouncing around in your skull since yesterday's silver for peace transaction. Where are the women? Not in the villages you raid, not on the ships. At least not often. But back home, running farms, minding children, handling trade, and sometimes, picking up a shield and joining the raids themselves. You've heard the tales, sure. Shield maidens, women in chainmail with spears and wild braids, fighting shoulder to shoulder with the men. You assumed they were legends, story fodder, the stuff old warriors whisper into mugs of ale. But today, you meet one. Her name is Ragna. You spot her when you stop to trade with another Norse crew near the fjords. She steps off her ship like it's her front porch, a sword slung over one shoulder, expression like carved stone. A few crewmates chuckle nervously. One opens his mouth to say something dumb and wisely closes it again. Ragna doesn't shout. She doesn't strut. She simply trades cloth for fish silver for herbs, a stolen brooch for a bottle of something potent enough to make your teeth tingle through the cork. And when she's done, she nods once and leaves. Her crew, half women, half men, follows her without hesitation. Historians still argue about how common female warriors actually were. Some say rare, but respected. Others insist they were more myth than reality. But the graves don't lie burial sites with swords and spears, alongside female skeletons have been found across Scandinavia. Evidence of women who not only fought, but led. You think about the women back home, the ones who patch your cloak, carve your runes, plow your fields. Stronger than half the men in your crew, less dramatic, more effective. You remember your mother once chasing off tax collectors with a ladle, and 3 curses you still won't repeat. The truth is, Viking society wasn't simple. It had roles, yes, but those roles bent and flexed, depending on need, talent, and personality. A woman could run a household-owned land, divorce her husband, and occasionally swing an axe if she felt like it. You overhear one of your crew mutter, "I'd follow her." It's not a joke. It's respect. Later that night around the fire, the conversation turns to home. Not just the places, but the people. Wives, sisters, mothers, lovers. One man carves a tiny wooden figure that might be his daughter, or maybe his goat. He won't say. You talk less. Listen more. Realize that for all the noise and blood and chaos of raiding, these men are anchored not by glory, but by memory. By voices that wait across the sea. By women who keep the world spinning, while the rest of you try not to fall off its edge. One crewmate sings a lullaby his mother taught him. Another hums along. Someone throws a pine cone into the fire and says, "To the ones who stay." You don't sleep easy exactly, but you sleep right. As if reminded that this life, wild as it is, doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are people who patch what you tear, who wait without knowing when or if you'll return. The fire crackles low. A dog snores near your feet. The stars blink quietly overhead, like eyes that have seen it all. And maybe, just maybe, they have. You awaken to the smell of damp wood-burnt pine needles and something faintly resembling salted herring gone rogue. A raider's breakfast buffet. You stretch joints stiff from a night spent curled under a cloak that definitely isn't long enough. Someone is already singing badly. You recognize the tune. It's about goats again. Today is a rest day. No sailing, no raiding, No haggling with nobles over how much silver you're worth in threat value. Today is for sharpening blades, washing tunics, and arguing over who snores the loudest spoiler. It's Bjorn, and he denies it with suspicious vigor. You take a short walk beyond the camp, following a deer trail down to a mossy clearing. It's peaceful, almost soft, the kind of place where nothing sharp exists. You sit on a stump and think about home, about raids, about fleas. Mostly fleas, if you're honest. There are a lot of them lately. When you return to camp, someone is tending to a pot over the fire. Another is repairing a shield with practiced care. One man is sewing a hole in his tunic with the delicacy of a midwife. You've never seen him fight, but you've watched him embroider runes into his shirt cuffs with haunting precision. You do not doubt his swordsmanship. And then there's bedtime. Viking bedtime. You'd think raiders would just collapse like sacks of potatoes at night. Sometimes, sure. But not always. There's a ritual to it. Cloaks rolled just so. Weapons placed within arm's reach. One crewmate sleeps with his axe under his head for dreams of glory. Another insists on putting herbs under his pillow to ward off bad omens. You once saw someone whisper apologies to their helmet before dozing off. You did not ask questions. Your own setup, simple. Cloak. Boots off. Head on a sack of rope that smells vaguely like fish and possibly feet. Cozy in a Viking kind of way. Sleep doesn't always come easy, though. Especially on nights when the fire burns low and someone starts telling stories you wish were funnier and less possibly true. Like the one about the Draugr, the undead warriors who roam the land angry about unpaid debts or stolen boots. You chuckle at first. Then you lie awake for an hour, thinking about that one pair you definitely borrowed without asking. Historians still argue whether Norse people were as superstitious as the sagas suggest. Some say yes. Everything was an omen, a message from the gods. Others say a lot of it was just dramatic flair, the way modern people knock on wood or avoid black cats. Either way, when the wind howls through the trees and something rustles in the bushes, you clutch your axe just a little tighter. You learn to sleep light. Not quite asleep. Not quite awake. Just enough to snap up at the sound of movement, but relaxed enough to dream of warm fires, soft bread, and dry socks. Always dry socks. Tonight there's no raid looming. Just stars and a fire, and the scent of pine sap drifting over camp. Someone starts humming that same tune about goats. You hum along, because at this point, it's basically a lullaby. You drift slow and heavy, as if your thoughts are wrapped in wool and tucked under the earth. You're not in a monastery. You're not charging into a burning village. You're here under the stars in a quiet moment that somehow feels rarer than treasure. And you sleep, not because you've earned it, but because it's the only armor you have against the long day waiting on the other side of morning. Morning greets you with a grunt and a boot to the ribs. Not an attack, just Gunner's friendly way of saying, breakfast's ready. You sit up groggy, wiping pine needles from your face. The fire's already stoked, and someone has managed to scorch porridge to the bottom of the pot again. Tradition at this point. Today is market day. Not your market, though. You're heading to a nearby trading post neutral ground, a place where swords or sheathed goods are bartered, and no one officially admits to where their merchandise came from. The longship glides along a narrow estuary, the water as still as sleep. You pass other ships, some from Norse villages, others from Slavic Frankish, and even Arabic merchants. No one shouts. Everyone watches. The post is bustling tents flapping in the wind. tables piled with furs, amber-salted fish weapons, and one man selling healing stones that are clearly just pebbles dipped in goose fat. You admire his hustle. You dock and step into the crowd. The air smells like sweat smoke and roasted nuts. Someone's playing a bone flute badly. You dodge a goat. Standard market atmosphere. This is where raiders become merchants. You trade stolen coins for cloaks. You swap jewelry looted from monasteries for dried dates from the east. And occasionally, you run into someone whose village you may or may not have raided. It's a bit awkward. Historians note that Viking trade routes stretched far farther than most people realize. Norse goods have been found in Baghdad. Arabic coins have been unearthed in Swedish graves. You once heard of a Norse merchant who married a woman from the Caspian Sea and brought back recipes for spiced wine and pickled plums. His longhouse was very popular. You barter a pair of Frankish boots for a spool of silk, and it's so soft you can barely believe it was made by worms. A young boy offers you a carved comb in exchange for a story. You tell him about the time Bjorn got his foot stuck in a monastery window while fleeing a very determined nun. The boy laughs until he hiccups. And then something odd. You see a man with skin like burnished bronze, dressed in layered robes, speaking through a translator, a merchant from the Abbasid Caliphate. You've never seen fabric like his, or spices that smell like smoke and honey and fire all at once. You trade one of your rings for a tiny jar of something he calls zaffaran. Saffron, you later learn. Worth more than gold by weight. You sniff it. Your nose tingles. You sneeze. Everyone applauds. Markets like this weren't just about goods. They were about gossip alliances, quiet rivalries. Who's raiding where? Which kings are fighting? Who's paying Dangeld? Who's secretly broke? You hear whispers that Norse ships reached as far as Constantinople, that the emperor there hired them as guards. Varangians, they're called. Personal bodyguards with long beards and longer axes. The pay is good, the food is better, and you don't even have to raid. Tempting. Historians still argue whether trade or raiding made the Vikings more powerful. Truth is, they fed each other. You raid, then sell. You trade, then scout. It's a cycle oiled by greed and grain. By midday, your crew gathers at the ship, arms loaded with loot of a different kind. Bolts of cloth, jars of honey, strange cheeses, and one enormous rooster with a terrible attitude. No one remembers who bought it. Everyone blames someone else. You push off the wind, catching your sail once more. As the market fades behind you, you realize how strange it is, this life of fire and feasting blood and bartering. One moment you're storming a church, the next you're politely haggling over salted walnuts. It doesn't make sense, but it works. You sail east now, tracing the coastline like a finger on a faded map. The wind is steady, the crew well fed, and the rooster, now named Eric the Loud, has finally stopped screaming at everyone. Small victories. As you pass into narrower waterways, a rumor spreads through the crew like wildfire soaked in mead. There are Norsemen who sailed all the way to Arabia. You scoff at first. Rabia camel sand. That sounds made up. But then one of the older raiders pulls out a coin silver round, inscribed with squiggles that definitely aren't runes. Arabic writing, someone says. Found it in a grave mound wrapped in silk. Suddenly it doesn't seem so far-fetched. You dock at a riverside trading camp deep in Slavic territory. The locals speak a language that flows like water over stones. You catch words you recognize: silver sword salt. The three essentials, really. They guide you to a long path that bends like a snake. One of many that they claim leads all the way south down to the Black Sea, and from there to the heart of the Muslim world. You sit on a log, listening to tales traded for meat and cloth. One man swears he saw Norsemen in Baghdad. Baghdad of all places, serving as guards, merchants, even diplomats. He claims the streets there are paved with marble, the air thick with spices, and the palace is large enough to hold 100 longhouses stacked like fish traps. You'd doubt him more if his breath didn't already smell like truth and garlic. Historians still debate just how far Norse travelers went. Did they really reach Baghdad? Evidence suggests yes. Coins, goods, and even written records show Viking travelers called Rus sailed down the Volga and traded with the Abbasid Caliphate. Some stayed, some vanished. Some came back rich and unbearably smug. Trade wasn't just about stuff. It was about contact, learning, watching, copying. Vikings took what worked navigation tools, silk garments, new ship designs, and blended it into their world like honey stirred into ale. One crewmate unwraps a parcel he bought, dates sticky and sweet, packed in dry leaves. You try one. It explodes on your tongue like sunlight soaked in syrup. You eat 3 before anyone notices. The next few days are quiet. You travel inland following winding rivers that reflect the sky like silver threads. Forests press in. Villages grow smaller. The world narrows, becomes intimate. Less shouting. More watching. At one camp, you meet a merchant with ink-stained fingers and a beard braided into loops. He sells scrolls written in languages you can't read, one of which he claims. This is a love poem from a Persian scholar to his cat. You want it to be true. He also sells talismans, little carved stones said to ward off snakes and bad weather. You buy one, mostly because it looks like a very surprised frog. That night, you sit by a campfire far from home, chewing dried fruit from a land you've never seen, staring into flames, with men who've seen things you still can't picture. You think of your first raid, how green you were, how loud the monastery bell had sounded. Now here you are, 1,000 miles from that bell, wearing boots traded from a Slavic craftsman, eating food wrapped in foreign leaves, sleeping with a silk sash under your head because it feels lucky. You've changed. The crew has changed. The world is opening. And somehow you're still afloat. The sea finds you again like an old friend, salty, moody, and occasionally throwing a wave in your face just to remind you who's boss. You've left the winding rivers behind the Slavic markets fading into memory, along with the taste of those glorious sticky dates. Now you're back, where the long ship feels most alive, the wind snapping the sail, and the hull humming beneath your feet. But something's changed, not just in you, but in the whole crew. You're no longer a band of reckless raiders swinging axes at anything that moves. There's structure now, routine, and God's help you rules. You notice it as the ship glides into a Norse-controlled harbor. There's a tax collector waiting at the dock, clipboard in hand. Okay, fine. It's a piece of wood with tally marks. He nods at your sail, asks where you've been, what you've taken, who you've traded with, and whether the rooster is for consumption or companionship. You hesitate. Eric the Loud glares at him. The taxman backs off. This is what some call the corporatization of raiding. It's still dangerous, still wild. But now there's oversight. Guilds, tributes, even agreements with local kings. Some raids are licensed. Some settlements pay yearly not to be touched. You've become less pirate, more mobile tax burden with an axe. Historians often refer to this period as the institutionalization of Viking expansion. Raiding became organized. Crews had elected leaders. Spoils were divided by strict percentages. There were even rules for when someone accidentally took more than his share, usually involving humiliation, a cold swim, or in one notable case, having to wear a chicken carcass on his head. For a week. You see it in the way your leader now consults a schedule. You swear it's just charcoal, scribbled onto a board. But still there are dates, targets, alternate routes, and even fallback options in case of bad weather. This isn't chaos. This is planning. One of your crewmates grumbles, it's getting too tidy. Another nods, sipping ale from a clay mug that has the word chief scratched into the side. He's not the chief. He just likes how it sounds. You spend the evening in a supply town run by fellow Norsemen. It's quiet, civilized, even cozy. There's a tavern with straw on the floor and a chalkboard above the hearth that reads, "No raiding indoors." You smirk. Progress. You buy new boots, real ones not looted. You pay with silver from your own pouch. It feels weird, like paying for air. But the boots are warm and soft, and honestly, you've earned this. Outside, merchants haggle over grain. A man in priest robes. Norse priest, not Christian, talks to children about Thor's hammer and the importance of not putting frogs in cooking pots. It's strangely wholesome. The longship gets restocked. Ropes, nails, barrels of dried cod. And because someone thought it was funny, a carved wooden duck that quacks when you squeeze it. You don't question it. You notice something else, two young men asking questions. Wide-eyed lads with barely sprouted beards watching you like you're something out of a saga. They want to know what Paris looked like. How much silver a Danegeld weighs. Whether Baghdad really smells like cardamom. You tell them just enough to keep the legend alive. Leave out the fleas. The bad stew. The time you fell off the ship trying to impress someone by flexing. That story doesn't make it into the sagas. You're not the green recruit anymore. You're one of the seasoned ones now. A veteran of raids and trades, ghosts and goats. And as you lay on the deck that night, staring up at the stars, listening to Eric the Loud snore in his crate, you realize this life is changing. Not ending, not softening. Just growing up. The sea glints like hammered silver under the late afternoon sun as your ship slices south again, hugging the coast with the kind of practiced confidence only a seasoned longship crew can pull off. You've been raiders, traitors, tax avoiders, and accidental diplomats. But today, you're something else, travelers. And your next stop, a land of strange smells, stranger gods, and even stranger fashion. It starts with a rumor whispers of Vikings in Baghdad, not just passing through, but living there, serving as bodyguards, trading fur for silk, attending banquets where the dishes are spiced with words you can't pronounce. The very idea feels surreal. You sitting on a cushion with no boots, eating something that didn't come out of a pot. Shaped like a dented bucket, you sail inland via one of the great river systems. Maybe the Dnieper, maybe the Volga. Each bend in the water weaving you closer to a world you've only heard of in tales and drunken exaggerations. And then it happens. You meet them. The Rus. They're like you, but shinier. Their weapons are polished, their robes trimmed with bright colors, and their hair braided in a way that suggests either great patience or multiple mirrors. They speak a mash of Norse and Slavic and Arabic switching tongues mid-sentence, like it's no big deal. One even uses the word sultan with a straight face. Historians agree that the Rus were a Norse people who settled eastward, blending into the Slavic world, and eventually forming what we now call Kievan Rus. They were part merchant, part warrior, part middleman. Vikings 2.0. You sit with them by the fire, listening to stories of southern cities with marble palaces and gold-leafed mosques, of deserts that stretch forever, of merchants who use ink that smells like cinnamon and write on paper thinner than dried fish skin. You ask what Baghdad is like. They smile. It's loud, one says, and hot, and busy, and full of people who think we're savages until we fix their doors or guard their money better than their cousins do. Another adds, they bathe. A lot. You'll be doing that. You try to imagine it yourself in a robe clean, politely declining another plate of lamb and apricots. It's difficult, but not impossible. And the trade incredible. You see silks with colors so rich they practically glow. Spices you've only ever smelled in whispers. Perfumed oils. Copper pots so perfectly rounded they look carved by gods. Even glassware, clear, smooth, fragile. Glass, not horn. You feel like a goat looking into a mirror for the first time. You trade what you can. Walrus tusks, amber beads, thick cloaks, polished axes. They love the axes. One merchant lifts one reverently, like it's art. You learn a new word. Durham. Silver coin. Sleek, weighty, stamped with looping calligraphy you cannot read, but immediately respect. At night, the Rus sing songs that somehow sound like home, and yet don't. The rhythm's there, but the stories twist eastward full of horses and palm trees and market bazaars. You sit by the fire listening with half-closed eyes as someone roasts nuts over coals and passes around a pipe filled with something floral and faintly suspicious. Historians still argue how fully these Viking explorers assimilated into the Islamic world. Did they just visit? Did they settle? Did they become them? The answer, like most things, is yes and no. Some stayed. Some passed through. Some returned north, dressed in fabrics that made them look like very confused ghosts. You fall asleep with the smell of frankincense in your beard, and the distant sound of someone playing a stringed instrument that sounds like rain. Your dreams are hot and fragrant, and full of towers. In the morning, one of the Rus offers to teach you Arabic numbers. You decline. But secretly, you hope you dream of them again. You're back on the water again. But this time, something's different. It's not the smell, still fishy. It's not the crew, still loud, still arguing over who snores the most. It's the way you sail now. Less like a band of marauders. More like a business. Aye, slightly disorganized, occasionally drunk business. You notice it when someone starts talking about shares. Not loot, not plunder shares. As in, if we sack this coastal town, I get a bigger share because I fixed the rudder last week. You blink. Is this? Bureaucracy turns out yes. Rating has gone corporate. You've got ranks now. A chieftain, deputies, an unofficial quartermaster who keeps a ledger, which is really just a goat hide with tally marks and something that might be jam stains. The crew votes on destinations. You hear someone say, "Let's wait for favorable weather patterns." Weather patterns. You miss the days of just yelling land and sprinting toward whatever wasn't on fire yet. Historians note this period as a turning point when Norse raiding culture evolved into something more structured. Not empire building exactly, but heading that way. Settlements began to spring up where raids used to end. Forts turned into towns. Raiding parties became governing councils. The sword arm of the Viking world was growing ahead for logistics. Today's target is a fortified village rumored to be rich in grain livestock and oddly specific brass bowls. You're not raiding blindly, though. You've done reconnaissance. Someone sketched a crude map on a piece of driftwood. Someone else did math. It feels weirdly adult. The plan is to strike at dawn, but not before a vote. 5 men say wait for fog. 3 say go, now. 1 abstains, citing emotional reasons. The fog wins, and wouldn't you know it? The plan works. You sneak in before anyone has a chance to scream. 1 gate, 2 guards asleep a single clumsy goat. It's over in minutes. No drama, no fire. Just efficient acquisition of portable assets. You even leave a note. It's charcoal on the barn wall. Thanks for the barley. Nice bowls. 1 crewmate suggests raiding a coastal market next, but only after calculating risk versus reward. Someone uses the phrase resource drain. You stare at him like he just turned into a monastery. And then it happens. A tax dispute. You're distributing the grain back at camp when someone claims he deserves a larger portion due to personal risk incurred during poultry relocation. He means he chased a chicken into a ditch and twisted his ankle. A heated debate follows. Words are exchanged. So are beats. A vote is called. Eventually, the group agrees no more solo chicken chases. You sigh. This isn't the life you signed up for. But it's also better. You're not just raiding anymore. You're building something. A system. A community. A mobile, sarcastic, goat-smelling democracy. Historians will one day marvel at how Vikings went from terror to trade, from fire to farm, from chaos to culture. But you're here now, watching it happen. 1 chicken, 1 spreadsheet, 1 increasingly polished axe at a time. That night, someone suggests adding a new role to the crew. Chief of Bowls. They're only half joking. You fall asleep to the sound of waves and the scratch of someone updating the ledger. Eric the Loud crows once, probably in protest. You smile into your cloak and mutter, "Tomorrow we hold elections." You wake up to find someone carving tally marks into a shield, not for kills, but for successful negotiations. You're not even mad. You're impressed. Somewhere along the way, your crew traded swords for schedules, raids for resource management, and looting for light bookkeeping. You are essentially a seaborne startup now. But don't let the system fool you. This life still has bite. Today, you sail toward territory held by the Anglo-Saxons. Again, you've raided them before you've traded with them, and at least once you've been paid by them to please just go anywhere else. And yet here you are again. They always rebuild, and you always return. Only now you're not arriving as invaders. You're arriving as settlers. The word feels strange in your mouth. Settler. Like someone who gave up the axe for a hoe who swapped plunder for plowing. But it's happening. Slowly but surely. You reach the shores of eastern England, where patches of land have been carved out by Norse hands, marked by Norse stones, and ruled uneasily under Norse law. This is the Danelaw. Historians define it as the region of England under Norse control in the 9th and 10th centuries. A place where Viking customs, language, and law intermingled with abject Anglo-Saxon life. Here you don't just raid, you govern, you collect rents, settle disputes, and argue about things like fence lines and whose pig wandered into whose garden. You step off the ship, not with sword drawn, but with a basket of tools. A local greets you with wary eyes and a loaf of bread. Progress. You're housed in a timber hall beside a modest village. There's a blacksmith, a grain mill, and a tiny chapel with a priest who pretends not to recognize your crew from a previous incident involving a stolen bell and some very creative storytelling. You help build a fence. You repair a roof. You teach a local boy how to throw a hand axe. His mother is not pleased. That night, you sit by the fire with both Norse and Saxon neighbors. You trade stories, share ale, and attempt to explain Eric the Loud to someone who insists roosters don't usually try to bite horses. You disagree. And then the lawman arrives. He's Norse, tall, gray-bearded, carrying a staff carved with runes and responsibility. He presides over a thing, not the vague kind, but a thing with a capital T. A meeting, a court, a gathering of men and women to discuss problems, punish crimes, and make decisions. One farmer accuses another of stealing a goat. The accused insists the goat wandered. The goat in question eats someone's cloak while the debate rages. Verdict: shared custody. The goat stays with the one who promises to keep it off the roof. The thing ends with cheers and more ale. Disputes resolved, agreements made, community reinforced. You sit back and realize you're part of something now. Not just a crew, but a culture. Historians still debate how Viking the Danelaw really was. Some say it was fully Norse in character. Others argue it was a hybrid zone, a gray area of blended identities. What you know is this: you arrived with fire, and now you're mending fences. That counts for something. Later, as you walk back to the hall, a child runs past you speaking Old Norse with a Saxon accent. You smile. You've seen both ends of the Viking age, the axe, and now the agreement. And honestly, the agreement's a little quieter, a little warmer, the kind of thing you could get used to. You fall asleep to the sound of livestock fire crackling and Eric the Loud clucking his approval. This is the new world, and you helped shape it. By now, word has traveled faster than any longship can sail. Your name, not just yours, but your crews, your villages, your very kind, carries weight. The same people who once called you savages now invite you to their courts, their feasts, their diplomatic tables. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. Today, you find yourself welcomed and side-eyed in equal measure as you dock near a modest settlement, with a very nervous-looking scribe standing on the shore. He's holding a scroll and a quill, like he might have to defend himself with them. You reassure him by smiling. It doesn't help. This is a formal meeting. That's new. A local alderman has summoned you not to surrender, not to beg, but to negotiate. Not for Danegeld this time, for something stranger. He wants you to protect him. Apparently, his enemies are not raiders, but other lords. Greedy neighbors. Border squabbles. He's heard you're good with a blade, good at holding your word when it suits you, and excellent at scaring people simply by standing still in chainmail. So you do what any good Norse entrepreneur would do. You sign a deal. Or rather, he signs. You make an X. Close enough. Suddenly, you're not the threat. You're the solution to someone else's threats. Mercenary. Enforcer. Consultant if you're feeling generous. Historians sometimes call this the Viking PR crisis, because now everyone has a version of you in their chronicles, and no two versions match. To some scribes, you're a demon in human form. To others, a misunderstood explorer. To poets, you're thunder made flesh. And to a few lonely monks, you're that fellow who stole my sandals and wished me a good day. You see the contradictions in the faces around you now. The children stare in awe. The old women shake their heads. The men tighten grips on plow handles, but still pass you bread and ale. You've gone from fearsome to famous. And fame is a tricky thing. Back at the hall, one of your crewmates is trying to explain to a local bard that the raid on Lindisfarne wasn't as dramatic as the songs say. No fire, he insists. Just confusion and a very angry goose. The bard doesn't care. "Goose stays in," he says. You walk outside, needing air. You remember the beginning when your boots first hit the shore of a monastery, when your blade shook in your hand, when you had to pretend to be brave. Now you barely flinch when someone calls you a hero or a villain. You've been both. And that's the thing. You've become a symbol, one that means different things to different people. To some, you're a cautionary tale. To others, a story of strength. And to more than a few, you're just the reason they now sleep with their doors barred. You find it both amusing and exhausting. Later, you hear that a bishop somewhere wrote a letter to a king, calling Vikings bearded storms of sorrow. You like that one. You might even carve it into your shield. And yet, despite all that, you're still just a person. Still sleep under the stars when needed. Still miss your mother's bread. Still wonder if Eric the Loud is going to live forever out of sheer spite. You sit by the fire that night, surrounded by strangers who are slowly becoming neighbors. You've moved through history acts first. Yes, but now with open hands, too. And people are watching. Which means what you do next will matter more than ever. You wake before the others, slipping out of the longhouse into crisp morning air that smells of wood smoke dew and faintly of sheep. The town is still asleep except for a few dogs chasing ghosts and one extremely loud rooster who you suspect might be Eric's long-lost cousin. The quiet is rare, precious. So you walk, out past the thatched huts beyond the grazing fields to a low hill where you can see the sea, your old companion glittering in the distance like a mirror full of memories. It's been years now. Years since your first raid. Since that icy monastery and the panicked bell. Years of sailing, stealing, trading, laughing, burying, building. You think of those you've lost along the way. Men whose names live on in songs or jokes, or the way you still pronounce certain words. You think of the towns you once looted, now rebuilt, and sending gifts to Norse settlements. You think of Paris, and the goat, and the chicken, and Baghdad, and bowls, so many bowls. And you wonder, was it always like this? Historians still argue whether the Vikings faded from history or simply blended into it. Some say the Viking Age ended with a sword to the face. Others say it ended with a plow in the soil. But here now on this hill, you don't feel like an ending. You feel like a continuation, a thread woven into a larger story. You return to town just as the day begins. A blacksmith is stoking his fire. A farmer is yelling at a pig. A woman is trying to sell fermented turnips to a man, clearly too polite to say no. Civilization Viking edition. Your crew is gathered in the yard, sharpening weapons, mending sails, arguing over whether it's time for another raid. Someone says no. Someone else says maybe. Someone shrugs and mentions the weather. But you stay quiet. Because today, you feel it coming. Not another raid. Not a feast. Something subtler. Something heavier. Legacy. You overhear a boy reciting your name. He's heard of your deeds. All of them wildly exaggerated. He says you once sank 3 ships with a single arrow. You do not correct him. You help a local carpenter build a new door. You fix a leak in a longhouse roof. You teach a girl how to hold a shield properly. These things don't make it into the sagas, but they're what lasts. A visitor arrives by sunset. A messenger from another Norse village. He brings news settlements to the north want to form a council to discuss trade, territory, disputes. You've gone from raiders to administrators. You should feel insulted. You don't. You feel tired and proud. That night you sit around a small fire carving runes into a length of driftwood. Not for magic, just memory. You carve the name of your first ship, your brother, the goat, the song you can't forget. You place it by the fire, not to burn, but to keep warm. You've seen the world change. You've helped change it. One village at a time. One deal at a time. One quiet morning after years of chaos. You fall asleep not with your axe, but with your hands behind your head, staring up at stars that look older now, but somehow gentler. And you dream of longships, sailing still. You wake to rain. Not a storm, just a soft, persistent drizzle that seems to have settled in like a guest who won't leave. It patters on the thatch, runs down your boots, and makes the goats look personally offended. Eric the Loud refuses to crow. Progress. Today the plan is simple. Attend the council meeting. Yes, council. You, the once rookie raider who barely knew which end of the sword to point forward, are now invited to talk about things like grain storage, border maintenance, and God's help you marriage treaties. The meeting takes place in a circular timber hall, on the edge of the settlement roof, crowned with carved dragons. Benches worn smooth by years of negotiations, arguments, and the occasional chicken chase. You walk in dripping and muddy, and realize you're among equals. Warriors, yes, but also farmers, merchants, chieftains, women with sharp minds and sharper eyes. All gathered to talk, not fight. It's unnerving. The first topic, fences. One village claims another moved theirs by a goat's width. You're not sure how that translates into legal distance, but it takes 30 minutes to settle. Then come trade routes, grain distribution, a stolen horse that may or may not be a very ugly cow. The usual. You speak up once to suggest creating a shared storehouse before winter. People nod. Someone actually writes it down. You, a Viking raider, just contributed to regional logistics. Historians would later say, this was the mark of transition, the shift from raid to rule, from sword to scroll. The Viking world didn't vanish. It adapted. It grew towns, held councils, sent envoys. Eventually it sent sons to university and daughters to markets. But here it starts with this. A muddy room full of damp people trying to agree on what to do with too many turnips. After the council, there's a feast. Of course. Roast meat, root vegetables, fermented drinks with names that sound like sneezes. There's music loud and familiar. The same goat song again. Someone always brings it back. You sit at the edge of the firelight, watching the next generation young faces lit by flame, telling exaggerated stories of raids they barely remember or never lived through at all. One boy claims he saw you wrestle a bear. You don't correct him. It was a drunk farmer in a bear cloak, but still. You step outside for air. The rain has stopped. The sky is open now. Stars scattered like spilled grain across a velvet cloth. The hall glows behind you, voices rising and falling like the tide. Somewhere out there, other longships sail. Other settlements argue. But here for once, everything is still. And then a child runs up to you holding a stick like a sword. Are you really the man from the stories? You look at him. His eyes are wide, full of belief and questions. You kneel, tap the stick with your fingers. I was, you say. But now I help write the new ones. He stares, then nods, then runs off yelling about your legendary beard, which is honestly just average. You return to the hall quieter now. You sit. You eat. You laugh. Tomorrow, the sea may call again. But tonight, you belong to land. To people. to a life that no longer demands fire to make its mark. And for once, you don't feel restless. You feel home. The morning arrives not with drums or horns or storms, but with birdsong and the warm scent of baked barley bread. You step out into golden light that filters through the trees like it's in no rush to get anywhere. And for the first time in a long time, neither are you. Your ship rests by the water's edge, tilted slightly on its side, like an old warrior napping in the sun. Its hull is patched, the sail is faded, but it's still seaworthy. So are you. The council is ended. The feast is over. The fields hum with life. And you've decided to stay. It's not the kind of dramatic ending sung about in mead halls. There's no battle, no last raid, no final voyage into the fog. Just a choice. Quiet, steady, real. You help dig irrigation ditches. You learn how to build a better grain bin. You even try baking bread. And despite the jokes, some of it is edible. You become part of the rhythm here, where sun and frost matter more than silver, and your worth is measured not in war stories, but in how well you fix a fence before the storm hits. But make no mistake, the sea never leaves you. Some nights, you still hear waves in your sleep. Still dream of sails, unfurling of oars, dipping in time of the sky, stretching endlessly above a horizon made of possibility. And when traders pass through, you ask questions about distant lands, about what kings rise and fall, about whether Baghdad still smells like cinnamon. One day you walk out to the old ship. You rest your hand on the carved prow. You whisper something, not a farewell, not exactly, just a thank you. Historians would one day say that the Viking Age ended, that its fire burned out its sails, dropped its stories buried. But you know the truth. It didn't end. It changed. It became rivers and roads and towns and words. It became trade routes and family lines. It became the quiet strength behind walls, not just the wild howl outside them. You became a father, a neighbor, a name passed on, not in fear, but in pride. And long after you're gone, when a child hears a story of Vikings, of ships and storms and sagas, of someone who once faced down kingdoms and came back to plant barley in the same soil he once raided, they'll say, "That was you, wasn't it?" And someone else will smile and say, "Yes, but he also made a very strange tasting bread." And now as the fire crackles low and the waves hush their song, let your body soften into the earth beneath you. The sea for now is still. No sails flap, no blades ring, just the slow breath of a world that has seen too much and yet always wants to see more. The stars blink overhead like watchful eyes, ancient and patient. They've seen every raid, every fire, every ship slipping into morning mist. They've seen you at your worst, your boldest, your most tired, your most human. Tonight you don't have to row, you don't have to swing, you don't have to lead, you just have to rest. You've earned it. Let the aches drift away. Shoulders, arms, feet. All those miles walked, sailed, fought, laughed, built. Let them settle like leaves on a still pond. The world is not asking anything of you right now. It's simply holding you. Breathe in. You are no longer chased. Breathe out. You are no longer chasing. The wind has gentled. The axe is quiet. The stories will wait. Sleep now, traveler. Sleep now, raider. Sleep now, builder of new worlds.